Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, in our brand new study in Perichoresis and Personhood by Twombly, published in 2015. We're going to begin with the introduction, which will be just chapter 1, pages 1 through 8, and just get a brief look at the introductory comments to the book, and that will launch our study. Let's go to block 1 and take a look at the role of John of Damascus. John of Damascus was a theologian from 675 to 749 AD. He understood perichoresis as mutual immanence. Well, that term was borrowed by Barth. That term was borrowed by Moltmann. Mutual immanence. 3 doctrines are abbreviated under perichoresis: the doctrine of God, the doctrine of Christ, and the doctrine of salvation. John of Damascus addresses these doctrines in his work, The Font of Knowledge, and in his work, The Orthodox Faith. So we're looking at perichoresis and theology in the late 600s, early 700s. After the Council of Chalcedon, which took place in 451 AD. And the big issue was the issue of Christ's personhood. That was the theological topic of the time, the personhood of Christ. John of Damascus entered the monastery of St. Sabas, a monastery situated in a culture of religious pluralism. Therefore, his teaching can speak to our own pluralistic situation. So let's go to block 2 and take a look at perichoresis as the stretching of traditional theological concepts. Classic doctrinal concepts. John of Damascus spoke out against 13 heresies: Egyptian heresies, schematics, and Muslims. He affirmed the need to heed true tradition. So perichoresis was to express the relational side of doctrine, true traditional doctrine, but to look at the relational side. And that meant perichoresis addressed the 3 main doctrinal relationships: the Trinity and the concept of hypostasis, the unifying of the 2 natures of Christ as the incarnate Logos, and the relational movement toward theosis unification when speaking of salvation. Therefore, affirming true tradition and emphasizing relational perichoresis equals a new emphasis on eschatological theosis, eschatological unification with the Godhead. All because we are baptized into the sanctified humanity of Christ. Perichoresis will always preserve identity and difference in the midst of this process of unification. So in the block 1 and block 2, we learn, first of all, that the book is going to deal with the doctrine of perichoresis, very specifically as taught by John of Damascus, who was late 600s, early 700s. And that it all began with discussion about the personhood of Christ, but then moved on to theology, Christology, and soteriology. And it involved the Trinity and hypostasis, the essence of existence. It involved trying to define the incarnate Logos, and then theosis, unification. So that takes us on to block 3. Let's go to block 3. And in block 3, we take a look at perichoresis, expressing a reality that is beyond concept. The doctrine of perichoresis is beyond concept. It's a doctrine that preserves identity, it preserves difference in the midst of unification. It carefully articulates Christ's incarnate reality. Christ's incarnate reality. Perichoresis is a concept used to stretch existing concepts. There's your key statement. There's your key axiom. Perichoresis was used to stretch existing concepts. In other words, you did respect traditional doctrine. You did heed true doctrine, but you stretched the concepts because you realized that if you're really going to understand the triune relationship of the Godhead, it's a mystery. And you stretch the concepts because the reality is greater than any conceptual expression. So that's your key axiom. Perichoresis is a concept used to stretch existing concepts. That's Block 3, Note 2a. That is your key axiom. And it stretched the concepts for God, Christ, and salvation. There was a refinement of perichoresis through dialogue after the Council of Chalcedon. Dialogue addressed participation, dialogue addressed communion, and it tethered together identity and difference. No loss of identity, no loss of difference in the midst of this process of unification. So let's recap here. We went through that fairly quickly, but if you go to Block 1, we're looking at the theology of perichoresis from 675 to 749 AD. It is a theology that was borrowed by Karl Barth. It is a theology that was borrowed by Jürgen Moltmann. It was a theology that addressed the doctrines of God, Christ, and salvation. Theology, Christology, and soteriology. And the main source for this book is going to be John of Damascus's book, The Fount of Knowledge. And then in Block 2, we learned specifically the relationships that are being addressed. If you look at 2.2, A, B, and C, the Trinity is being addressed in the concept of hypostasis. Remember, hypostasis means essence of existence. The essence of existence that the Father, the Son, and the Spirit all participate in. Perichoresis also addresses the unification of the two natures in the incarnate Logos, Christ. He was fully human, fully divine. And then perichoresis also addressed the relational movement toward theosis unification, the eschatology, the hope of our soteriology, which in the 7th century was theosis. Remember when we studied Maximus, it was theosis, which means deification, but what was really meant was unification, reunification with the Godhead. And then in Block 3, we learn the key axiom for the entire teaching of the introduction. Block 3, Note 2, Subpoint A, perichoresis is a conceptual theological doctrine that stretches existing theological concepts. We don't abandon traditional theology, we stretch it because we realize that understanding the triune Godhead and the relational aspects of the triune Godhead is a mystery that is beyond us, therefore it is beyond conceptual expression. So perichoresis stretches conceptual doctrine. It stretches our concepts to becoming signs that point from hard-drawn concepts to fluid signs. And then we can understand a circular, triune Godhead that encloses all of creation in perichoresis embrace. And so it's all about that key axiom. The introduction tells us John of Damascus realized that you don't abandon, instead you heed true tradition. But you realize that true tradition cannot be concretized, it can't be made hard-lined, forced concepts, it must move on to fluid signs of signification that point beyond conceptualization. Perichoresis is a reality that is a mystery. It's beyond concept. We will stretch our thinking, we will stretch our theology, we will stretch our theology while remaining true to tradition, while remaining true to Scripture. We will take up the signs of perichoresis. Not the hard-line concepts, but the signs of perichoresis. So it gives us our foundational axiom. The introduction gives us the foundational starting point. Twombly tells us we're leaving the world of hard-line drawn concepts. We're entering into the world of 7th century theology, later taken up by Barth and Moltmann, but we're entering into 7th century theology that was trying to understand the mystery of Jesus Christ being fully human and fully divine, that hypostatic union. And that led to another great investigation into the Trinitarian union, the unity of the triune Godhead. Both of those are a mystery, and perichoresis basically said we're going to leave the realm of rigid, concrete concepts, and we're going to enter into the mystery of divine wisdom, the mystery of the triune perichoresis. It's about fluid signs, not concrete concepts. It's about the fluidity of signs that point to this mystery. And in that way, it can inspire our motivational base. In that way, it can inspire our wisdom of the heart that will influence the wisdom of the mind and will influence our ministry, our participation. So we get the role of John Damascus, we get the stretching of traditional concepts, and we get a recognition that we're involved in a dialogue that will include participation and communion, and it will speak of the unity in the triune Godhead that preserves identity and preserves difference, yet unifies all creation in the eschatological concept of theosis, which was called deification in the 7th century, but they really meant unification, to be reunited with God the Father through the perichoresis, triune, circular work of the Godhead. So we get a great beginning, a great introduction, and we're going to break up chapter 2 probably into 2 parts. So we'll pick up 2a as our next lesson. This is going to wrap up chapter 1 through 8, and we'll pick up in our next lesson in 2a, the first half of chapter 2.